EduMatch. You're at EduMatch. EduMatch. Don't miss EduMatch. Don't miss EduMatch. You're at EduMatch. EduMatch. Don't miss EduMatch. Don't miss.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to EduMatch Community Forum. Super excited because today, as you can see, we have a full house and we have some amazing people on panel. So in just a moment, we're going to go around and do some introductions. But remember to, wherever you're watching this, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be on YouTube, like, subscribe, join our community. You can find us at edumatch.org. You can also find us on Twitter. You can also find us on Facebook, all of the different places. So tonight's topic, we are going to be discussing social justice in education. So first thing that we're going to do is just some quick introductions. So let me see. So anyone who would like to begin, just go for it. Maybe we can start with Cicely because she's the first person I see next to me. We'll just go in order. We'll just go down the line.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cicely Day. I am a community schools manager at Grass Valley Elementary here in Oakland, California. And I've been in education for at least the last 20 years, and as a teacher, as an early childhood educator, and before and after school care. That's it.
All right. Awesome, Cicely. Thank you so much. And next we'll go to Victor.
Hey everybody, Victor Small Jr. I'm a co-founder of the Restorative Justice League, the RJ League for short. I am a consultant, facilitator, advocate for restorative practices, do a whole bunch of other stuff, father, husband, dog human, that sort of thing. Happy to be here.
Well, we are happy to have you, Doc Victor, so thank you so much. All right, next up we have Doc Desiree.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Desiree Alexander, been in education for 20 years as a classroom teacher, a librarian, and a supervisor at the district level for instructional technology. And now I am the founder CEO of Educator Alexander Consulting and the deputy director for the Associated Professional Educators of Louisiana. Hello.
All right, thank you so much, Doc. Great to have you. Okay, next up we are going. Oh, I actually I snaked the line. I snaked the order, but yeah. So welcome, Doc, and thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, Sosan Jabed, 24 years in education, currently an English teacher in East Leiden High School in Illinois, and CEO and co-founder of Education Unfiltered Consulting. I always say we wear many hats and work in a lot of different avenues, but I'd like to think of myself as an equity strategist, and equity being the focus of everything that I do in education. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We are super excited to have you. All right, next up we have Justin.
Hello, my name is Justin Schleider. I am a health teacher for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students in Central New Jersey.
All right, great, Justin. Thanks for joining us. And last and certainly not least, we have the awesome Salandra in the house.
Hi, I hope y'all can hear me now. Yes.
Yeah.
So my name is Salandra Grice, and I am a former educator with about 10 years in the elementary classroom. I am the founder of Conscious Education Consulting and the executive director of Conscious Educators for Equity. Both foundations and endeavors focus on dynamic and transformative learning experiences for educators in culture responsive and equity-based practices. And like the rest of you all, I am extremely passionate about equity in education and super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. We are super excited to have you as well. So thank you so much to everyone for being on panel. Thank you to everyone who is watching this currently and who will be watching this at a later time. You might be hearing a special guest in the background. So as you know, we are a family-friendly show. So my little daughter is giving her perspective as well. But just FYI. So without any further ado, we're going to get it started and kick off the very first question. So we'll do this in a way that if anybody has something that they'd like to say, they can just go ahead and pop in. We can use a private chat if that makes it easier to coordinate. But we just want to get your take on this. So the first question, how can educators maintain academic freedom and inclusivity in the face of increasing pressure from parents and government officials to ban books and limit discussions on topics including representation, equity, and social justice. So that is a big, meaty question. But what say you, panel?
I'm going to say that the biggest thing that I keep pushing for is making the shift from working for students to working with them, and really elevating their voices and getting them to be the co-creators of content and bringing that into the classroom. I always say students are our best resource. And so if we can not focus so much, because we have to not focus so much on bringing all these different texts in and going through the red tape of trying to get the text to come into the classroom, if we can elevate student voice and really have students share their authentic experiences, use technology to connect our students to different communities where there's more diversity, then the students become the textbook. And we're also eliminating the fear of teachers who think that they understand students, but really they understand them from a stereotypical perspective, bringing in texts that are more stereotypical as representative when they actually aren't representative. So that would be my 2 cents on that. Elevate student voice, work with them, have them create the text, and nobody's going to censor what the students are creating in the classroom.
Yeah, that was a great point that you brought up about a lot of times how the texts are stereotypical themselves that sometimes teachers would bring in. So I appreciate you making that point, as well as the other points that you made. Great. Anyone else?
I'll jump
I guess
in. I know when I am doing trainings in states that where teachers have been banned, where they have laws that literally say you cannot talk about history and you cannot talk about social justice issues. One of the things we discuss, because I don't want to give them advice that is going to have them lose their job or you lose their position. So a lot of things we talk about is exactly what Dr. Sosin just said, is to have the students participate much more than we have them participating now. Have the students, speak to questions, speak to things that they want to know, bring up topics for discussion. And most of the time, that's going to create much less backlash than if the teacher brought it up themselves or brought it into the classroom. So that's one of the things we're talking about is, well, how can we do that? How can we create those brave spaces where students are allowed to communicate and express themselves?
Yeah, I absolutely love the points that y'all are making about the students creating the content and being able to share their own voices. So absolutely. All right. So I'm going to kick it next to Cicely.
Hi. Also, when I was listening to both of you all, I was also thinking about just focusing on identity and really focusing on students' families and where they're from, and just really concentrate on really getting to know who your students are. And if those awesome things come up, then that's great. And it's kind of like everyone else has been stating, navigates around that whole issue of um, the book banning and limit discussions. Because if we're talking about who they are as people, just naturally going who they are, it's a great way to get into the meat of who people are without kind of having to deal with some of those things, because it would just happen organically. I hope that makes sense. I always think about maker education, how I use like making and science and stuff to kind of get to that as well.
Yeah, that is dope. I absolutely love that point about the identity and I would love to hear more about how you use it in Maker Ed. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, for me, I always say everyone's makers. It's not just white men with 3D printers and blue beards, but just everyone has grown up with a maker or have been making for centuries, right? So for me, the thing that I identify with as a maker is sewing and crocheting. And so my family, that's something my mother does. So I try to link back to like gardening or working on your car or working on DIY stuff, just anything that your family does as a maker, and just bring that into what happens in your neighborhood. Is anyone in your neighborhood who are makers, So kind of just go on that kind of direction of what happens at home, who's been the makers in your home, and how does that affect you as a person?
That is fantastic. Love that. Love that. Absolutely love that. So next up, we're going to go to Victor.
Yeah, I love what's already been said. Feel like y'all are just kind of in my brain. I need you to get out of it for a second. But just to build on what's been said, clear communication is also important. Um, Parents, other educators, folks that, feel a little touchy about those subjects, they don't want to feel like they're being lied to or held in the dark. So we have to be completely honest and transparent about what we're doing in our classrooms when we're being asked about it. The other thing is the ongoing community building and culture building that needs to be happening in the classroom, so that students can continue to feel safe to bring pieces of themselves within the room every day, and push for their learning and advocate for themselves.
All right, fantastic. Yes, thank you so much, Victor. Absolutely love that point. And we're going to go next to Salandra.
Yeah, so again, everyone has wonderful points. And of course, advocating for the students and letting their voices kind of speak and lead that inclusivity, I think is amazing, and definitely one of the best ways to go. And one of the things that I always do with educators, as we're in scary times right now, and helping them, continue to teach what they know they need to teach, is just be courageous. Sometimes we're going to have to do things in spite of opposition. And no, I don't want anyone to lose their job. I know we all have mouths to feed. Um, I'm always an advocate for closing my door and teaching anyway, and doing what's best for my students. And of course, we're always going to have naysayers, but I do find that the students and the parents who actually understand the importance of a student-centered classroom really do appreciate educators who are able to back up uh, what they're doing, their content objectives, why their classroom is the way it is. And absolutely, if it is centered around the needs of all of your students, not just some, then I think we really can't go wrong there. And so I really always just try to encourage educators to be courageous in what they're doing. Stand up for your students, stand up for yourselves, and continue in what you know that you're supposed to be doing, that supports all of your students more equitably.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now is definitely the time for courage. So couldn't agree more. All right. And we are going to go back to Desiree, who had another point that she wanted to make.
It's so funny because it's kind of the exact same point as piggybacking off of what she just said. And that's because the question says educators, and that, is a big plethora of people, that we also need fighters. Like, we also need a call to action. We also need to stand up to the loudness of ignorance. So that's one of the things, it's sometimes it's hard to say, especially if you're talking to the boots on the ground classroom teachers, because they do want to keep their job. But when we're saying educators, that can include all of us, even sitting here today. And this is not just a classroom teacher problem, because that's who the focus of the ignorance is on. So we have to have fighters. We have to have people that are going to try to change the laws. We have to have people that are going to fight against the ignorance, that are going to stand up to say, well, no, this is not okay, even if I'm not in that position. So I definitely wanted to, put those 2 cents in there, because we have to also fight.
Absolutely. Yes. It takes all of us. It takes all of us in all of our different roles. Agreed. All right. And Justin, how about you? All right. I'm not sure if we can hear you, Justin. We might have lost audio on you. So, um, okay. But we will,
There it is. Sorry, finally.
oh, okay, cool.
It is bad boy. So again, I mean, it depends on what state you're at. So if you're in Florida or Tennessee, these are really scary times, and you have to be super aware of everything you're doing. If you're not, we have to talk with admin, You have to get them on board. Where am I able to push? Where am I not? And have these honest conversations. Then you have to find the parent groups who are already doing this work, get with them and say, listen, we need your help as well. So again, we have to figure out like, where is the line? How far up to that line can we push without putting our job in peril? And then also getting the parent groups to stand up and say, hey, this is what we want in the classroom as well. Because we have, the loud side, the moms of whatever, who are kind of against what's going on. But there's also other sides that are for this, that are sticking up. So let's find those parent groups and say, listen, we need your help as well.
Sorry, it took me a while to find the unmute button, but absolutely, yes, there are parents on both sides, and there are parents who are allies. So I love that, connecting with the groups who are, fighting on the side of right. So absolutely. All right, cool. So we're going to go now to the next question. We had a great discussion on the first topic, but second question, we are talking now to the boogeyman of CRT, right? So this question is trying to see in what ways can we as educators effectively address the misconceptions and concerns surrounding critical race theory, even though it's typically not taught in K-12 education, while still promoting social justice and equity in the classroom. So we're going to start first with Salandra. So what is your take on this?
Yes, that term, the boogeyman. I always find these discussions about critical race theory, especially how much they come up nowadays, um, s- disheartening, frustrating, and sad at the same time because it's thrown out as something that has been going on for forever, and every teacher is out to get every student. But a lot of times when we push back on people who bring up this topic in education, they really don't even know what it means. And so I find that interesting. And so as educators, if we want to address, misconceptions about CRT, we first have to be at the forefront of knowledge of what critical race theory is, right? So we have to know that it was come from the legal scholars, studies, and it's from the 70s. It wasn't anything that was taught in K through 12 schools. It's actually something that is for college age students, for research practices and theoretical frameworks. It's in no way, shape, or form, this thing that we use to indoctrinate students. Yes, a lot of its tenets do undergird a lot of our social justice aspects, as they should. But no one in K through 12 schools is sitting down and trying to brainwash students into thinking whatever it is that some of these far fetched, um, I don't know. I don't know what to call them right now, but just people who are just taking all of this and running with it, whatever they think that we're doing. And then on top of that, once we identify what critical race theory is, that it's not taught in K through 12 schools, really get to the heart of what is it that you're actually scared of, right? We know a lot of this comes from the fear of the truth. And for some people, when we start talking about history in the United States, we start talking about actual legislation that has been passed, that continues to be passed, who it affects, why it affects them, then it does start to point in one direction. And some people get very upset about that. Unfortunately, if we keep looking the other way, we're always going to continue to repeat these historical patterns where nothing gets solved, where we continue to create legislation that harms certain groups of people, including students in our classroom, and we never get to the bottom of it because we're too scared to address it. So I hope that teachers can arm themselves with some knowledge about what critical race theory is and make that connection between the research, what is actually practiced in classrooms, so we can kind of nip a lot of those misconceptions in the bud.
Yes, absolutely. So, um, I love what you're saying about about that fear and the fear that people have of the truth, and how we need to definitely push past that and educate folks on what is really, what CRT is and is not, and to let the truth be known and advocate for the truth in our schools and districts and counties and organizations. Great. All right. Next up, we have Sosan.
I think CRT is just an excuse, right? It's the next big word that people are afraid of because we need something to be afraid of. And I think Solandra touched on that. Whenever we elevate fear, people are no longer rational. And so it then allows for a lot of things that wouldn't necessarily happen to happen. So I think, and this is an opinion that I feel like I've changed my opinion about a lot of things in the last few years, just based on things that are happening in classrooms. The reality is equity work needs to happen in schools today more than ever, because we are the only country in the world that is literally facing mass shootings every single day. We are the only country in the world where our babies have to go through school lockdown drills because we have shootings in schools every single day. So much of that is driven by fear. So much of that is driven by misunderstanding. And it's not Black and brown students who are in a lot of places the aggressors in those situations. So we have to really name those things. And I think I'm tired of tiptoeing around those topics. We have to be explicit in saying we have a broken country. And a lot of these things that are happening as a result of the fear that we've created over criminalized identities and bodies in our country. And so whether it's critical race theory or anything else that we want to call it, we have to recognize the interest convergence that we all have as a country and a community to have these conversations with fidelity and humanize historically criminalized people and really look at the way education has contributed to so much of that fear, based on the way that we teach history, based on the way that we elevate fear in single story curriculum, in misrepresentation or a lack of representation or complete erasure of histories and identities of certain groups of people. And so whatever comes up, and the siloing of our country, right? And I think regardless of the physical siloing of communities in our country, we have a tool today. Technology gives us the opportunity to break down any barriers and walls and bring our students into different spaces and bring different people into our spaces, also humanizing and really looking at what it means to be whatever it is that you are in whatever way that you identify. If we're going to talk about critical race theory, if we eliminate the fear when it comes to that, those who are afraid of the work and are going to weaponize the work will weaponize it no matter what we call it. And so I feel like critical race theory is just the new big buzzword that people want to use to silence communities, school communities primarily, because the power to really to heal our country is in schools. That is the reality, right? Schools are the only place where we can really get people to unlearn and interrogate what they understand, to read the world effectively, to ask those tough questions, to do all those things that we expect them to be doing in order for them to walk out into the world and do what we promised. Is we're creating space for students who are able to really survive and be impactful in their post K-12 world. Currently, what we're doing is we're making sure that students are able to, gain the skills so that they can go to good colleges and get good jobs after. We have a very capitalistic perspective, and that's also kind of leading into the deterioration of society as a whole, because we're not looking at how can we make sure that all kids are contributing to the to dismantling the status quo, to being effective and having equal opportunity to really voice their concerns and their opinions and their needs as members civically engaged in this community in order for us to heal and fix it. And so I think that we need to stop tiptoeing and being afraid and waiting for people to buy into the conversation. We need to stop thinking about how to make it more digestible, equity, or have these conversations or call it something else because people are afraid of this word or the other word. And we just need to center the fact that if we don't start to have these conversations with fidelity across the board with all of our students and all of our community members, we're going to continue to be afraid every time we send our kids to school, to a marathon, to a movie theater, to any gathering, even to a dry cleaning, to a club, wherever we are. We're afraid of these mass shootings, and it's only going to get worse. And so we need to start having these conversations, and we need to understand that this is the only way that people are going to start to heal in a broken country, and we are the only broken country.
Yes, indeed. So many nuggets there. So absolutely. All right, great. Let's go next to Victor.
That's not fair that I have to follow that. That's not cool at all. Why did you? That's messed up, man. All right. All right. So the important piece here is being critical, right? Like that's the piece that we really should be emphasizing when we're talking about the boogeyman, right? really what CRT, like the part of CRT that could really be drawn out is the critical piece, right? Because critical thinking is something we should be teaching no matter what subject it is, right? So there's that. There's also connecting with your people. Throughout the nation, there's tons of teacher activist groups. Like, link up, like, reach out. Like, you're probably trying to do something that somebody is already trying to do and they have resources for you. So go search it out. That's what's really cool about Google. um, Another thing that's important is to expect pushback. You're going to get pushback. This is still important though. It's important to lead this work, right? Mentally expect that, spiritually expect that, and still find a way to lead with joy, uplift the joy, especially the joy of your oppressed, ignored, underserved students, right? Yes, of course, we should be talking about all the issues, systemic, cultural, that our students face and have faced within this country. Absolutely. But we also need to make space for joy to be talked about. Who are the innovators? Who are the leaders? Who are the ignored? Right? That also needs to be brought up. Leading with love, right? Because I'm going to tell you, it's stressful. And if you don't allow yourself, like, the joy of knowing that you're fighting this fight, then it's going to be hard. But every day you have to get up, look yourself in the mirror and smile, because this is what you should be doing. And if it was easy, it would already been done. Maybe. Yeah, if it was easy, we'd be done. Racism would have been over, Martin Luther King would have finished it off, we'd all be done. Slavery should have ended it, but it didn't. And so this is something we still have to that we still have to fight with, and you can do it too. But smile while you do it.
Thank you so much, Victor. So I appreciate that point about the joy, bringing in the joy and celebration of the innovators and the movers and shakers. Absolutely. All right, great. Let's go next to Desiree.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I absolutely love this conversation and the things that are being pointed out. I love the not working in silos, because I think we do feel like we're alone a lot of times when we're trying to, work on this, and there's people just around the United States working on the same thing. So I love that message of not working in silos. I also love the message of, it's not, I mean, critical race theory is it's just a term, right? If now is critical race theory, is SEL, is critical thinking, like all of that is being attacked in education and promoted as indoctrination, right? I just teach math. Same thing I was told, like, just shut up and bounce the ball, right? I mean, it's the same mindset. So one of the things I think of when you say in what ways can educators address the misconceptions, first of all, you have to pick your battles. Like, if you say I'm against critical race theory and I ask you what is it and you cannot answer that, I'm going to pick my battles, because some people are just going to fight for fighting's sake, right? So I'm not going to waste my time. And it's, in my opinion, not a defeatist, attitude, but I'm not going to waste my time trying to fight something that is not even there. Like, your opinion is not even there. You're just a talking piece for someone else. Now, if you can tell me what it is and you say, well, these are the points that I don't like about it, then we can have a conversation, right? Then we can have a discussion. So I think that if I'm like looking at the question of how educators can effectively do this, it is by talking, it is by speaking, it is by having those discussions. But I'm also going to pick my battles, and I'm not going to waste my energy on just someone who doesn't even know what it is. Like, you're fighting against stuff you don't even know what it is. I think another point to this is reframing what are we doing in education in general, right? And it may not be the work of individual educators, but us coming together. What are we doing in public education, private education, whatever, but what are we doing in education in general? I think just looking at the history of education, a lot of times it was to promote the status quo. It was to keep things going the way that certain people wanted them to go because it was being successful for certain people. And now that like the egg has been cracked open and we started to see, even though a lot of us already knew, but more of us are starting to see, the cracks in the system, and the cracks are just getting larger and larger and larger with all of these discussions, all of these fights, and all of these don't teach my student how to think. I just want you to, teach them how to sit and be compliant. And then we start to question, well, what is this all about in general? So I think it's such a bigger issue than critical race theory. And I know I'm, going to the question and going beyond the question, but it is beyond this question. That this, like you said, it's the boogeyman, it's the talking point. But if we don't get beyond it, then we're just going to be in the same loop until education fails, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And I wanted to also thank you, Desiree, for being the initiator of this topic. So this rich discussion is brought to you by Dr. Alexander here. So fantastic. So also wanted to just kick it over to Justin to wrap us up on this question.
So first, Dr. Alexander did a great job of stating if it's not CRT, it's going to be woke, it's going to be liberal, it's going to be SEL, it's going to be something else. So understand that that's what the right does. And what they've successfully done is taken CRT and conflated it with race. So now it's not that they don't want you teaching CRT. They don't want you teaching race. And literally, this has been written out. It's documented. You could go search it up. They said as soon as CRT started gaining steam, hey, what we're going to do is we are going to attack CRT so bad that we can't even bring it up, and we're going to conflate it with teaching about race. So instead of being defensive, we don't teach CRT. I want to go back to what Solandra talked about before. Lean into it, right? So tell me, why don't you want me to teach CRT? Right? And then we could try to figure out what the deal is. And really the bottom line is they don't want us talking about race. They don't want us talking about identity. They don't want us talking about marginalized and oppressed groups. They don't want to talk about the real history of the United States. So that's really what we're battling. It's not specifically CRT. And then my last point, Victor talking about joy. Joy is activism. I love that one point. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And again, I'm having trouble with the mute button and identifying where it is, trying to navigate this layout so I can get all of your wonderful faces full screen. So, all right, excellent. So great points were made for the second question. So the third one, we're going to shift gears just a little bit. Let me pull up the banner here. So the third question here, we're talking about all of our different stakeholders. So how we can foster open communication and collaboration between educators, parents, and governmental officials to create an inclusive and socially just learning environment for all students. So we're going to start first with Solandra.
Yeah, I love this question because I think it really gets to what I find is missing in a lot of the school environments that I operate in and that I work in, and that is strong and equity-minded leadership. We've got teachers who are the boots on the ground, like we said, who are activists, who are passionate, who do wonderful work with all of their students, pre-K through 12, right? Who know what their students need, but they're stifled. They're stifled because their instructional coaches don't back them up. Their APs don't back them up. Their principals don't back them up. Their superintendents don't back them up because they're too scared, right, of the big boogeyman of, like we said, if it's not CRT, it's equity or it's social emotional learning. It's whatever term they want to use to stop educators from teaching students critically so that they do understand the world that they're in. Our leadership is severely lacking in a lot of our educational spaces. And so we're talking about if we want to foster open communication and we want collaboration, well, guess who helps make that connection for campuses? That's the school leadership. So if they're not openly talking with students about what their needs are, if they're not openly talking about teachers, if they're not openly talking with all the staff and the parents and the community at large, and then relaying that information to those superintendent meetings, school board meetings that they attend, there is going to be no collaboration because everyone is just talking at each other and not actually listening to what their needs are. And again, we can take this point right back to what we talked about earlier, which was how do we even keep inclusivity in the classrooms? And that is by focusing on our diverse students in front of us. And I think that if we keep that at the center, I know student centered is like a big term right now, but truly, a lot of our classrooms are not student centered. They're teacher focused, they're assessment focused. They are not focused on the needs of the students and the communities that we are supposed to serve. And that word is also lacking as well. Serve, right? We're not in that mindset that we're here to do a service. And so I really hope that in this conversation, whatever conversations, whatever action plans that we have to move forward, it does involve not the getting on board of, but actually putting leaders in place who can advocate for these things with us. So all that open communication and collaboration can happen. Because I was that classroom teacher who was the only one on the grade level. One time, the only one in the school who was like, why aren't we talking about equity? How come we're not doing this? How come we're not doing that? And it can't just be one teacher or a handful of teachers. It has to be everybody involved. And so I really hope that we can get more of those equity-minded school leaders in positions to help build those bridges between students, teachers, faculty, parents, communities, so that that break in policy and what research says is best for all students and practice can all come together, and we can actually start putting a dent in some of these inequitable practices that continue to harm our students.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it is all about working together. Totally. So we're going to go next to Sosa.
I'm going to say on this one, I think too, in addition to everything that Solandra said, which is amazing, that we need to formalize structures in schools that will allow the community to collaborate, right? Like, what does that look like? I think that's really, really relative. In a lot of schools that I've worked with and for, it's usually an audit. And then we take the audit results and we create this whole strategic plan. And that's what we use for the next years until we have another audit. But we saw with COVID how quickly the world is changing. And the reality is overnight, our communities are changing, the demographics of our community are changing, the needs of the kids that we're teaching that are sitting in front of us are changing. The family structures are changing. So much is changing that if we are only making changes between audits, that sometimes I wonder too aren't necessarily representative of all of our community and our microcosm, a piece of a much bigger puzzle, then we're not really being impactful. So thinking about formalizing structures like student equity boards, where students are constantly working with equity leadership committees and feeding into it from a student perspective, and making sure that when we are creating these student equity boards, that they are representative of the bodies of students that exist in our building. Creating affinity spaces for students and teachers where more information can be gauged in a space that is a brave space, but a safe space at the same time, especially for minoritized students. And even in a district like the one I currently work in, where we have a minoritized majority, we have students that live in a third space that are also a minority within a minority. And so giving them a space for them to really amplify their experiences in a district is really important. So affinity spaces are great. Ensuring that there are parent spaces too, and community spaces, even if community members don't have parents. Communities are a hub, schools are a hub for communities and really serve communities. And what happens in a school impacts the entire community. So how can we formalize meetings that happen in community spaces, in churches and mosques and libraries, where parents may not feel like they're able to come in and participate in a meeting that takes place in schools? How can we think creatively about timings that meetings are offered in a community like mine, where many parents work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet, where many parents like mine don't necessarily speak English? And so how do we make the language accessible to a lot of these parents that can come in and actually communicate in their mother tongue and formalize and formally participate in some of these spaces? We don't think about a lot of these things. How can we make them family friendly places? And how do we normalize getting street data from the field, from all of these different stakeholders that have a place in the field all the time? Because at the end of the day, the reality is we are in a demographic divide. There are less teachers working for equity than there are teachers working against it. And so even if we want to rely on the adults in the building, oftentimes that's not necessarily enough for us to really move the work forward with fidelity. The push has to come from the community. And we already know that the squeakiest wheel gets all the oil. And it's not necessarily our marginalized groups that have been the loudest and the most in speaking. And so I always suggest, and I am a poster child for the book Street Data by Shane Saphir and Jamila Dugan, and they do a really awesome job about talking about how to normalize feedback and get the feedback and use it to strategically to implement into strategic planning for districts on a regular basis, so that we aren't waiting for these big data points that only become one little piece of a much bigger picture, but we're actually integrating in everything that we do. And then the other piece is kind of what Solandra said, is administrators who are now understanding and recognize and realize that this is going to be the push and the focus and what we're really buying into, and now we're holding the people in the building accountable to doing the work, including themselves. So where does the accountability piece fall into place? Because what happens in a lot of equity spaces in schools is we sit so much in the conversational and we never move to the actionable. We talk, and by the time we start to implement, everything we talked about all of a sudden is irrelevant. And so how do we get people to actually talk and act and then hold them accountable for the actions in real time, so that it's actually impacting the students that are in front of us in an authentic way positively?
Absolutely. So not just talking the talk, but also walking the walk. So fantastic. We had some great comments coming up from Alex. Thank you so much for watching and for interacting. So we're going to get back to a couple of your comments after this question. So stay tuned, but we're going to go next to Victor.
Yeah, I want to continue to build off of what Solandra and Susan was talking about, especially the idea of, making sure that we give different groups a chance to speak in their own, in affinity groups and such like that. But then I was starting to think, how often do we get folks together to break bread and learn about each other's cultures, right? How often do we do that? How often do we celebrate holy dates that aren't mainstream, right? How often do we do that? How often do we celebrate holy dates that aren't mainstream, right? How much do we learn about that? How many opportunities do we really have? I think that joy, I'm going to keep coming back to that joy, but it's not just like, let's talk about this. It's, yo, you're a part of us. Be a part of it, right? A couple of things that I was thinking about when it gets to this topic is, realistically, social media exists. Like, if you as adults want to avoid having conversations about race, as Justin was talking about earlier, if adults want to avoid having conversations about race in classes, I'm gonna tell you one thing: they're still talking about it. They're just not talking about it in your face, right? And so how do we facilitate those conversations meaningfully, critically, right? The counter storytelling is important as well. As in a world in which stereotypes are often emphasized, putting stories that counter that to faces is extremely important. Just some thoughts. When do you get a chance to break bread with folks that do not look like you, talk like you, or celebrate the same things you do? Just thoughts.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. Absolutely. Okay, so we are going to go next to Cicely.
Hi. As a community schools manager, everything everyone's saying is what I'm supposed to be doing. In California, they started a new grant to have community schools managers in schools to help support our teachers, our parents, our staff, our community, and bring in and also reach out to help support our families and our community. So everything that you all are saying is things that I'm working on. I'm working on a community space for families who have students with special needs. I'm working on a community space for Latina families, Latinx families. I'm also working on the community space for African American Black students, but also coming up with other ways that we can get together as a community and just have room parents and all kinds of other things to have more family engagement, but also bring in more community partners to work with us as well. I think it's very essential, critical, crucial that there's someone like me or other people like me that help support this type of work and happening, because then I can go back to my boss who works in the central office and say, hey, or my supervisor and say, hey, this is what's happening, this is what's going on at the school level, and all of our CSMs can do the same and push to really have these conversations happen more often, because you have people that are already on the ground doing the work with educators, with leadership, with students and families, so that constant communication can happen. And then there's not like a wall that goes up, well, this person is not listening. Well, they have to, because we're here and we're doing the work, and the work can't be done if we get stonewalled. So I'm praying and hoping that more districts across the country will have more of a community schools model that Oakland's been doing way before they start having more community school managers, just to kind of have that leadership be there to push that communication, that collaboration across the board with everyone in the community.
Absolutely. I love you sharing about your role. So that is fantastic. And I agree. Definitely want to see more of that. So we're going to kick it over to Desiree for closing thoughts on this question.
Just very quickly, when I was listening to just all, like, again, amazing conversation with the answers to this question, I just keep thinking, what is going to come first, either changing our community or changing education? I think it's a little maybe naive to think that one is going to change without the other, that we can focus on strictly changing our educational system without changing our society. I don't think that's how it's going to work. I think it can't be done one without the other. So while I do think we can only, fight what we can fight, right? We can only focus on what we can focus on. I do believe in that's where we make the biggest difference, is when we start with our area and what we can do. I also think that we're going to feel like we're beating our heads against the wall, because we have larger issues in the legality of education and the business model of education, and just in society in general. So I think it all has to be kind of worked on together for any of this to make a difference, for any of this to become actionable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So working together is the name of the game, 100%. All right. So again, we want to thank everyone who's watching. Well, obviously everyone who's participating on panel, but also everyone who is watching. So Alex had a couple of comments that we said that we were going to circle back to after the question. So I believe this was in response to an earlier question. And here Alex was talking about treating the right as a monolith. So we need to hold faith for the movable. And looking at it from a place of humanity, Alex has friends on the right that recognize nonsense. So, Justin, did you want to go ahead and respond to that?
Yes. So I think it goes back to the question that you were asking as well, is what is the purpose of education? So I think the school districts too often don't have that. The leaders don't understand that. So how can we have clear communication with stakeholders when we don't even understand what it is that we're setting the school district up for? And I think we do fall into the idea of a monolith, that anyone against teaching about equity and social justice is on the right in general. And we have this idea that everyone is, and I guess I'll speak for myself here, is this Christian right fundamentalist who doesn't want this. But I'll tell you, my personal teaching, I do a lot around identity and how that impacts your health. I get a lot of pushback also from teaching about trans or LGBT from other religious groups outside of Christianity. So we have to really get the idea and understand that when we are in school, that every student deserves to be loved as they walk in the door. We're not trying to change your student. We're not trying to tell parents that you're wrong and that whatever you're teaching or your religion teaches is wrong. But what we will tell you is, especially around identity, that people deserve love simply for existing. That's the bar. Simply being a human being, you automatically deserve love. And if we start from that idea, then we can work out and go, okay, how does race impact how you feel that you're loved in the school district? How does religion impact how you feel that you're loved within your peers? And then you talk about sexuality and you talk about some of the other stuff. So I think that we really need to get together and say, okay, school is really more than just creating for jobs. We really want to create a better society. We want students to feel loved and accepted for who they are. That's why we have so much bullying. That's why we have the mass shootings. That's why we have a lot of the issues in school, because kids don't feel like they're loved and accepted. So if we are going to go with that as the basis, then we can have the communications with parents and every stakeholder, government, admin, whoever it is, of, okay, if we want them to feel loved, what do we have to do to bring that in? And I think that gets to Alex's point, where we can't alienate any group of people and say that you don't deserve love, you're automatically wrong. We'll listen to you, but we always have to circle back to the idea of, how does it make our students feel loved when we do X, Y, or Z, when we don't do X, Y, or Z? So we know with the hidden curriculum, that's as important as the explicit curriculum. So I think that is a really good point. We don't want to other anyone, and we want to go back to the idea that everyone deserves love and respect simply for existing. So even if I disagree with you, we can still talk about things and we can figure out a way to all do it together. And we don't want to sit there and say, okay, everyone on this side of the political aisle, or everyone from this religious perspective, or whatever, that we're not going to listen, or you're just pushing against it to push against it. So I think that is one of the things, to listen to the community and make sure we get back to the idea that everyone deserves love and respect simply for existing.
All right. Thank you so much, Justin. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we are starting to run short on time. Let me see. And Alex responded to what Justin just said. So he thanks you for your for sharing your thoughts, and also says, as a leftist Christian, LGBTQ plus and BIPOC ally, I understand that people are more complicated than the party or religion they affiliate with. Okay. Thank you again, Alex, for watching and for interacting. Okay, so we have time for just a couple closing thoughts on our final question. And this has been such a rich discussion, but unfortunately, all good things come to an end. So this is going to be our final question here. What role do educators play in debunking myths and misinformation about social justice topics in education, and how can they equip students with the necessary critical thinking skills to navigate these complex issues? Reading is fundamental, y'all, I tell you. So we are going to go first with Sosan.
This one's very personal to me because as an Arab Muslim woman, right, there's not a lot of people who look like me in educational spaces. When I speak at conferences, I'm often the only one. Even when I'm in spaces that are really hyper-focused on equity, I'm often the only one. And so as a Palestinian, that brings an additional layer of complexity into the space, with the intersections of my identity being problematic in every possible way in our current context. And so I think, to me, as an educator, the biggest thing is how I show up in front of my students, and my ability to really be vulnerable and to understand my positionality in that school space, but also how I position myself out of that school space, and how both of those things impact how I show up in my classroom and how I interact with my students. And so thinking about the decisions that we make. I know a lot of teachers, what I hear them saying is, it's not in my hands, it's the system, the teachers, the principals, the assistant principals, they're the gatekeepers. But in that classroom context, you're the gatekeeper. You have the power. You're making choices every single day that are impacting students directly. And so thinking about how I'm very vulnerable with my students. If I spend the first 3 weeks of my class of the teaching just really getting to know students and not asking them how many siblings you have, what sports do you like to play, but really thinking about, who are you? What are the intersections of your identity? What are your values? And how do we decide in our lives what's valuable to us? We really kind of chip away at a lot of things that are who we are as people, and really impact how we see the world and how we interact with other people. And that opens the door for a number of things, creating community. And we are really understanding each other beyond the stereotypical lens and beyond what we see on the surface. And every time my students share, I share. And I model and I lead with the sharing. I model everything that I expect my students to do in my classroom, whether it is my social life outside and having a diverse circle of friends, because if I am only hanging out with people outside of my school space with people who look like me, that's definitely going to impact how I show up in a more diverse space in front of my students. And so thinking about that, modeling the idea of challenging my own thinking in a lot of the work that we're doing in the classroom is really important. Modeling the idea of being vulnerable and sharing, modeling the idea of how to have a conversation that could be contentious when me and somebody else really differ in regards to something that we both value, but comes from a place of lived experience, so we're not invalidating each other. So I think that's a really important thing in the way we show up in classroom spaces, is being able to model and understand that historically, systems will always blame individuals. Individuals will always blame the systems. And unless, like Desiree said earlier, we're kind of working on all of those aspects together, that relational piece is so important. And when we're thinking about our role in schools, schools are political. No matter what we try to kind of separate political and education, you're making political choices when you're deciding what narratives to bring in and what narratives to keep out. You're being political. So these spaces are political. And the only way for us to make them inclusive is by modeling inclusivity and by creating space for students to really dismantle that sense of double consciousness and duality that so many of our kids have, by making our spaces really inclusive and by allowing them to translanguage, by allowing them to talk about their values, by holding space for the fact that our lived experiences shape our values, and therefore our values will always be different, and we can respect each other even if we don't see it eye to eye. And once we can get to that point, then we can start to humanize and appreciate the lived experiences of everybody else. And that really builds a community. And when I think about, I teach 120 students every year. I've been teaching for 24 years. How many students have I interacted with? How many kids will I continue to interact with? And that's just in my classroom space. Imagine if all of them have the ability to come to one space in the school at least and feel like they could really be their whole selves and have these conversations with fidelity. And I always say, like, if one of the police officers in the George Floyd murder had these conversations in a classroom, how might it have impacted the whole trajectory and the whole scenario itself? How could it have changed that narrative, right? If we think about the fact that the Supreme Court judges, that everybody sat in a classroom at one point, and these are kids that are going to go out into the world, and we're going to grow old and they're going to take over. How can these conversations really shape their understanding of just building empathy and humanity when we look at each other in a world that's become so desensitized? So lead by example is always my way to go. And I think that we need to roll up our sleeves and show our students that we are co-collaborators, not just allies. We're not just talking the talk, but we're actually doing the work alongside them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fantastic points. All right, great. So we're going next to Justin.
Woo! That was fire. I love the idea of modeling. So I teach a unit on love. I go over the different types of love, and I try to draw attention to the way I act and have them draw the associations with, okay, this is what I'm teaching you. This is how I go through life. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of why I interact with kids the way I do, and model and believe it. Like, I'm not just teaching it, I'm living it. So that's the first thing. Love that. I think the other thing is we have to understand what is people who don't want us teaching about social justice and not want us to teach about equity, what are they actually saying? And then how do we understand that? How do we try to empathize with them as much as we may not want to? So one of the things that I do when I teach in my love unit is we talk about how there were always white people who were standing up against slavery from the very beginning. We could talk about Quakers. I'll show them pictures of white people marching with Dr. King. So yes, the majority of white people let this happen, but there were always people fighting against it. So I feel like we have to also make sure that when we talk about this idea of white guilt, that we address that. We say we're not blaming white people today, specifically the kids in our classroom. Like I teach 10, 11, 12 year olds. So obviously they didn't do anything wrong. Yet we want to make sure they understand, like, you have a choice. And there are always people fighting on the right side of justice. And that's one of the things we're talking about. We want to bring you in. So we're not trying to alienate people. I think the other thing we need to do is we need to look in the mirror. We need to understand, where are we weak? Where's my weakness? History. If you don't know history, you can't understand what's going today. So how are you learning about the history of this country? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you reading those books that you bought during the pandemic to support George Floyd and everything else? Like, how are you focusing on what's wrong with you? And I think that's one of the huge things, because until you understand how we got to where we are, you look and go, you can't put all the pieces together. So I would highly encourage people, understand, learn, follow people much smarter than you, however you want to do it, books, podcasts, whatever. It really is about understanding the history in order to understand where we are today. And the last thing is learn more about groups that don't look and act like you, right? And that, I think, was going back to, I don't want to mess her name up, Salwar, I believe. I'm sorry, I probably butchered your name, but you have to learn about other groups, especially I'll talk to white people like myself. How can I find out? Muslim people, what do they believe? How can we find out about food and culture of people outside of whiteness? How can I just learn everything I can about other groups? Because then that's going to enable me to connect my teaching to them, to the individual in my classroom. So we're going to ask the kids, what are your identities? How do your identities impact you? How do they impact the way you bring yourself into this world, and specifically into my classroom? So I think, A, you have to learn more. B, you have to figure out where are you weak, and then try to shore that up. Because if we don't look in the mirror and figure out our bias, then we're strongly missing the point that we are the change and we are also the problem.
Oops. All right. Thank you, Justin. Thank you very much. So I think that you were piggybacking off of Sosan's point earlier. So okay, great. So we're gonna go next to Salandra. Salandra, I'm so sorry. Oh, I think you might still be muted.
There we go. So I'll briefly piggyback off of both points already made. And I'll say one thing that we already know, and one thing a lot of educators do not like to hear, but I tell them anyway. The one thing that we already know, right, is that we have to be better prepared as educators. Our traditional teacher preparation programs do not equip us, not, I won't even say effectively or at all, to teach social justice, equity, multiculturalism, cultural response, whatever you want to call it. We are not prepared. And so when we get into these classroom roles and we see the diversity in front of us, we see the multiplicity of the needs that our students have, a lot of us are like a deer in the headlights because we've been taught to teach one kind of way, a lot of which stems from like 19th century teaching practices, and not geared for the diverse students in front of us, who come in with so many different languages and experiences and identities, and we don't know what to do. And so we have to stop putting equity as a side note, as, oh, an extra if we have time, or a one-day seminar or 2-hour training. Because Lord Jesus, I'm tired of doing 2-hour trainings. I'm like, you can't be coach responsive in 2 hours, but okay, that's all you're going to give me. It's a whole commitment, right? We have to prioritize it, and we're not currently prioritizing it at this moment. The second point, and in that prioritization, we really have to make sure that teachers, like we said, they have to know their history, right? We have to have that social political understanding. We have to have some cultural, and I would say competence is like the bare minimum. we really have to have some cultural efficacy where we truly understand who we are, what our culture is, our experiences, how it shapes how we move throughout the world. We really have to have those understandings, and then of course bringing in research and best practice on what research says is helpful for all of our diverse students. And then the second point that we don't like to hear is we need a new breed of teachers. I'm sorry, but we've got some folks in the classroom collecting a check who don't need to be there, who are not concerned with the needs of all of our students, who are comfortable with what they have always been doing and are not helping and us move towards those waves of change that we have been desperately trying to implement since 1964, really 1954, in our education system. And so I do advocate for us to start looking for a different kind of educator. Yes, we want people who are competent in their content areas, right? However, but we also need someone who is already equity minded. They already have the mindset that I am here to serve all students equitably, right? That means I'm going to do what I need to do to meet the needs of every single student. And right now, we don't have a majority of educators who are committed to that kind of pedagogy within the classroom. And so, again, just that modeling that needs to happen. Teachers have whatever teachers have to teach teachers. We have to be able to do that ourselves and already have that kind of skill, disposition, and knowledge set ourselves. And that comes with better training. And then the last point, like I said, we really need to start looking for a new 21st century teacher to keep up with these 21st century kids and 21st century issues.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. And we are going to go last and certainly not least to Victor.
Yeah. Let me circle back to some things Justin said. Learning about yourself, your views, where you're coming from, your different ideas, um, how your how what you take in, the folks around you, impact the way that you look at the world. Um, Susan was, as Sasan was saying, um, do do your students know your experiences? Do they know your struggles? Do they know how you show up in the world? Right. Salandra brought in commitment to research, um, and one thing I'm going to build on her idea of making sure that we have different folks in the classroom, but like the folks in our classrooms need to look like our students. It's unacceptable if there is a school that has 60% Black students or 60% Indigenous folks, that the teacher percentages do not reflect those students. It's unacceptable. It's frankly unacceptable, and that's something we have to address. When thinking about how we're addressing this stuff, questions. We need to ask more questions. We need to unearth ignored connections, right? How does food deserts connect with red lighting, right? How do the ways racism shows up in our media, past and present, affect our mainstream views, right? Why is it that there are some Looney Tunes cartoons that still aren't on air, right? Why is it that there are some Disney movies that Disney don't want you to know that they made, right? There are reasons why some of this stuff is still available and you can look at. We just don't want to talk about it, right? Folks used to watch this stuff and watched it casually, and that's the reality. And so that's something that's something that we have to reckon with. That's just something that we have to acknowledge, that sometimes we just don't, and it's sad. But I'll leave us there on the saddest note possible of this entire talk.
Oh, I hear you, Victor. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I just wanted to thank everyone tonight for your amazing thoughts. This was such a wonderful conversation. Appreciate you all being here. Appreciate everyone who's watching either now, in the future, who will be watching or listening, I should say, on our podcast when that drops as well. So tune in tomorrow, same bad time. Well, no, different bad time, same bad channel. So we're going to have a book launch from Dr. Nick Sutton. So his book will be coming out tomorrow, his second book called The Post-COVID School. So check that out. And in addition, a week from tomorrow, I believe, then yours truly has a launch, the very first through EduMatch. So got to do a little, a little something, a little dance about that. Thank you all so much. So definitely check that out as well. So wanted to thank everyone for watching, and we will see you all next time. So I'm just going to go ahead and put on the video, and wanted to thank you all again. So big hugs, much love to everybody.
It's EduMatch. EduMatch. It's EduMatch. You're at EduMatch.